Hey, my name is Sara Smith-Silverman. My pronouns are she and they. I'm a professor of history at American River College, and today's date is December 6th, 2023. So let's start off by establishing the basics. What's your full name? What are your pronouns? And what's your date of birth?
My name is Sara Sarmiento. My pronouns are they, them, and my birthday is November 9th, 1994.
How old does that make you?
29.
Okay, tell me a little about yourself. What are your interests and hobbies? What do you like to do?
I am a returning student right now. I just started the library tech program at Sac City. I just like hanging out with my friends and being gay. That's always my response to people that ask, especially older people that ask, like, oh, like, what are your hobbies? And I'm like, I don't know how to tell you that I just hang out with my friends and we're just gay together. I'm an artist, a creative. I like reading. I like being out in nature. I like community building. I throw dinner parties for my friends and like to create a comfortable space for everyone to hang out in.
How do you be gay together?
I think that there's a like expectation of like how friendships usually look. And so living in queerness means that we're able to challenge that and build relationships that fit what we want. So being gay looks like fighting capitalism together and taking care of each other in ways that like a cishet relationship wouldn't normally.
So gay isn't queer, kind of.
Yeah.
So where did you grow up and where do you live now?
I grew up in Oakley, which is the East Bay Area. I moved up to the Sacramento area for school. I went to UC Davis. And I live in Sacramento now.
And what did you study when you were at UC Davis?
I got a bachelor's in psychology.
Why psychology?
I wanted to know how the human mind worked. And so I pursued that degree. I wanted to help people.
Did you figure that out? Figure it out, how the human mind works?
Kind of. I guess to the extent that I could.
So you said you're at Sacramento City College now?
Mm-hmm.
And librarian tech, that's what you said, right? So why did you decide to pursue a career as a librarian tech?
I've always had a difficult time choosing a career path, but library studies feels like the best I could do as an anti-capitalist in a capitalistic society. Libraries are very powerful spaces and very politically charged, and they embody all of the mutual aid that I like to embody as a person. And they provide a lot of services to people for free. And it's something that I really believe in. And so I think that libraries are one of the best spaces that still exist. And so I want to be able to work in them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Society rich in libraries, or I feel like libraries kind of they provide one example of what our world could be, right?
Right.
Within the old world.
Right. Yeah, they have, I mean, the like job resources that they have, or the parks passes that they've been providing, they help with a lot of, they'll have programs that you can navigate, applying for social services. And so it's a lot of things that there's a disconnect for people who maybe don't have access to that or like don't know how to navigate those things. But they have programs that can teach you how to do that.
Seeds.
Yeah, seeds, tools. There's a cake pan library in Sacramento.
Oh, there is?
It just has like 200 different cake pans that you could rent.
Wow.
Yeah.
And e-bikes.
Oh, yeah.
One of the branches, at least one. I think e-trikes.
Yeah.
They decided to go the trike route. Library, I feel like the field or being a librarians are often very gay as well. Is that something that you?
I
have come
think
across?
so. I think it's just the overlap of like neurodivergence and queerness that we've talked about, of just like being able to see things in a way that's different than the societal expectation, and applying that and going in that direction.
Is that something that you feel like you wouldn't mind elaborating on some? Like, what do you mean when you say the, like, how is that being neurodivergent related to, being queer and being a librarian?
Yeah. Neurodivergence, you see things in a different way and you process things differently. And so with queerness, it's taking gender norms and societal expectations, and not necessarily just going along with it because that's what's expected of you, and challenging those beliefs. Yeah. Let's come back to that later.
Okay, we'll come back. Yeah, I have a bunch of questions about this later.
Okay, awesome.
So can you wait, you also went to American River College, right?
Yes.
Were you just, so why ARC? What brought you to ARC?
My friend Julia recommended the queer studies class, and it sounded fun. So she was the one that brought me back into college. And now that I've taken those classes, I'm excited to just like continue taking classes throughout my life. I think being a student was such a huge part of my identity for so long that it's nice to come back to it.
Are you getting financial aid?
Yes. I have the California Promise Grant.
Okay. So the fact that you already have a degree from UC Davis didn't interfere with getting the Promise Grant?
Mm-mm.
Okay. I was wondering about that. Okay, so can you talk about how you identify with regard to your social identities, broadly speaking? Race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, disabilities, neurodiversity, religion, and so on? Okay, so we left off on the question about your identities.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
It is a big one. I think because of the nature of my identities, so I am mixed ethnicity. I'm Choctaw and Filipino and white. And growing up with that, I don't necessarily identify very strongly with any of them. My elementary school was mostly white, and so there was definitely an otherness to having other things mixed in with me. So I didn't feel that I could identify with that. But then once I moved, none of that was going in any direction. Let me start over. Because I'm mixed, I've never felt that I was whatever enough to identify with a specific identity. And so I wouldn't fit in with an all-white crowd, because I have my Filipino and Choctaw heritage. But then with like Filipino crowds, I never felt like I could identify with them because I don't speak Tagalog. And a lot of my Filipino friends growing up were first or second generation. And I don't have that either. So I don't have the shared experiences of that. My dad was born and raised in Oakland, and he's half Filipino, and he refused to learn Tagalog. So I don't have that connection. And then on the Choctaw side, I am a registered member of the tribe, but I just haven't really attended many events. And it is really difficult to pursue knowledge on that on my own because so much of it was lost throughout history. So I've just never been able to identify very strongly with any aspect of my ethnicity or really ties to any culture. And then for other identities, I am neurodivergent, and that definitely changes how I navigate the world. but it helps me to have a framework to build relationships on, and know how I process things and how I feel things, and be able to connect with other people who also experience the same thought patterns.
Okay, so on the social identity question, you mentioned that you're neurodivergent. Anything else you want to say there about any specifics about being neurodivergent before talking about the other facets of your identity?
I'm self-diagnosed autistic. I don't have currently any interest in pursuing a formal diagnosis, because that's just a long process. And I think that I'm able to access the resources that I need without having a diagnosis. But it's been really interesting learning about that, and realizing that all of these little quirks of my emotional expression, or just how I've experienced social things growing up, aren't just a personal whatever. It's not just me. It's not just a trait of mine. It's very comforting to know that it's something bigger, and there's other people who feel the way that I do.
So how about other aspects of your identity? Gender, sexuality, religion, class?
I'm non-binary. My gender is such a unique experience to myself. I think it's not something that exploring gender for me started with not necessarily feeling connected to being a woman, or being a man. And so I started thinking more about, like, what do these terms mean to me? And that's okay.
Take your time.
Yeah, that's, oh my gosh.
How old were you when you figured out that you were non-binary?
Gender just hasn't really been something that I've thought about my whole life. And I've never really felt pulled in either direction. I think probably in college, so like 2015, 2016, was when I started thinking more about gender. And it was kind of one of those, like, I don't feel like a woman, but I don't need to think about that right now. Like, I'll figure that out later. And I think at the time, I was still seeing things in a very binary way. And so I was like, okay, well, I know that I don't identify as a man. So that's not, like, I'll just put that in a box and shove it away for later. And then in 2019 was when I started to learn more about a non-binary identity and realize that I don't have to pick either end of the spectrum, and I can just exist in this fun little middle space, or a space completely off the spectrum, that I feel I identify with more.
And so sexual orientation?
I identify as queer. It more comfortably encompasses all of the identities that I would be attracted to. I think that my attraction is to other queer people. That's a really important aspect of finding partners. Is someone that I don't have to explain myself to, and someone who has a base understanding of kind of where I'm coming from with gender and sexuality. Yeah.
Okay, so what's next? Religion. How religious are you?
I grew up Christian, but not super in the church. I went to church pretty regularly. and especially the major holidays. My parents were both really involved in the church, but it was never like I never had pressure put on me to live up to any certain standard with religion. And then once I moved away to college, I just kind of stopped going to church. I had some other things happen with my parents where it kind of made me question the existence of a God. So during college, I just didn't really identify as religious. But throughout the years since, there have just been like some weird synchronicities that have happened that make me believe that there's something connecting us in life. I also took a psychology of religions course in my undergrad. And that was so interesting to learn the psychological aspect behind it, and seeing religion as kind of a coping skill to deal with all of the chaos that is life. And so just being able to see it as that makes it a little bit more understandable. And I think that's where my spirituality comes from too, is it is very comforting to have something to believe in that makes us not feel alone. It makes us not feel like we're solely responsible for everything that's happening right now.
Did you say spirituality?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what it means to you to be spiritual?
Just having respect for nature, having respect for the relationship between all living creatures, and knowing our place in this world. I also will do like tarot spreads and astrology and like dip into all of that. And it is a good way to frame things and think about, like with tarot, it's a good way to see, okay, does this card resonate with me? And kind of think about things that are happening and not necessarily see them as like fortune telling cards.
And then class.
Yeah.
Economic class.
What? I am lower class right now. Is that a thing? Is that
well, it's whatever feels right to you, but you could say
working class,
low income, poor. I usually like to say poor and working class, but a lot of people say low income.
Okay.
Some people say lower middle class in a way that makes me think more of the working class, but it's very individual.
Yeah. I would just say working class for now. I know that I do have some financial privilege in that I haven't experienced food or housing insecurities, but I do have a limit on the income that I'm able to make because of the programs I'm in with Medi-Cal and CalFresh. And so it's this weird balance of not being able to make over a certain amount, but if you make only a couple dollars over that limit, then you lose your benefits, and the amount that you're making isn't making up for the loss of those benefits. So that's been a weird line to toe when I'm in those programs.
I feel like a lot of people have that experience.
It's real, and then I have to explain it to my employers because they think like, well, of course you would want more hours because that's more money, but I have to make sure that I'm balancing that, and they don't necessarily understand. Healthcare. Yeah, right. Yeah, and that's the other thing is because I'm a student, I'm not able to work full time, and a lot of the times full time is only when you're able to get benefits. So it's not set up in a way to help us.
Yeah. And then a lot of employers purposefully keep their employees at part-time to avoid giving them health benefits.
Yeah. Thanks, America healthcare system.
Okay, so you kind of explained this already some, but is there anything else you want to say about what it personally means to you to be queer with regard to your sexual orientation?
I think queer is also an approach to relationships. So I touched on that earlier of how being queer means that you can figure out relationship dynamics that work for you, and not necessarily fit into this mold of what a relationship should look like. So it does require more communication, and making sure that expectations are matched in a relationship. But it can lead to really fulfilling relationships where you're able to be there for each other and talk through things in ways that maybe are a little more taboo in traditional relationships.
Can you think of any examples?
My housing situation. So I live with a married couple right now. And I think this is the best living situation I've ever been in. One of my roommates is disabled and unable to work. But we all take care of each other in a way that I feel like typical relationships don't. Where we found a way to have him be able to still contribute even though he doesn't work. So he takes care of a lot of the housing stuff with like dishes and chores. And being able to show up and support each other beyond what just like a typical roommate relationship would look like.
Is there anything else you want to say about that? What it means to be queer with regard to your sexual orientation?
Not necessarily.
So you say that you identify as non-binary and that you use any pronouns, but did you say you prefer they, them? Is that what you said?
Yes.
So can you elaborate on what it personally means to you to be non-binary and sort of why it's important for you to use the pronouns that you do?
Yeah. Being non-binary means that I'm able to live in a gender that I can create on my own, and not have to live by any expectations. My pronouns, I prefer they, them pronouns. I see pronouns as a sign of being seen and respected. And so if I tell someone that my pronouns are they, them, if they continue to use they, them pronouns, then I feel like that is a comfortable relationship to be in. The issue comes in spaces where they aren't as educated on they, them pronouns. So like at work, I say I'm all right with any pronouns. And I am. It's not something that brings me too much discomfort. But it's a dynamic where I don't necessarily feel like putting in the effort to educate them on queer topics, and educate them on how they, them is grammatically correct. And it's fine to use that, because that's something that confuses a lot of people. And so I feel like in that space, it is more, it's a better use of my energy to not deal with correcting pronouns. More in that space, it's a better use of my energy to not deal with correcting pronouns than it would be for me to continually educate and continually correct people on how to use my pronouns.
Is there something about emotions in what you're saying? So you're like what it feels like to have to educate people and what it feels like to be put in a place where you are kind of consistently having to correct people.
Yeah, it's exhausting. I like my gender is so personal to me that I don't feel like I should have to be like, queer people are not a monolith, and so I shouldn't have to be the one person to educate other people in spaces like work or classes. And I feel like a lot of the times when there is somebody who has an identity that isn't as common, they become like the go-to person to answer all these questions. But like, we just want to live and be able to exist in spaces without having to put in all of this emotional energy into educating people.
I often think about the generational divide that exists.
Mm-hmm.
Younger people, I don't know how I'm defining younger, but definitely teens, 20s, seem to be, from what I can tell so far, seem to be more flexible and more understanding when it comes to different forms of gender identity and different forms of gender expression and pronouns and all of that. Is that something that you find to be true, or is it more complicated? I mean, I know that it's not like a rule that older people are more confused and all young people, right, are understanding, but is that something that you've come across?
I think so. And I like to think that it's not just because I am in like a cute little queer bubble of people who are more understanding. But I think it's that the younger people have more access to information and are just presented with more information on social media about gender and sexuality and other things. So we take care to adopt these things and adapt to new information. It's really interesting that the older generation sometimes sees it as a threat. I'm assuming that that's where they're coming from, or sees it as a negative thing to question these expectations when there's such a life of freedom beyond that, where you're able to express yourself however you want to, and it's okay. But for some reason, they're tied to these traditional roles.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. Like, it can feel threatening to some people, even though if they open their minds, it actually could feel freeing, right?
Yeah.
For everybody. You don't have to identify as non-binary or trans to feel freer in a world where people can figure their own gender out for themselves, and be freer with regard to how they express their gender.
Right.
So can you talk some about your coming out experience? What was the process like of figuring out your identities, and how did people around you respond?
Yeah, I feel like my coming out process hasn't been there hasn't been a lot of fanfare around it. It hasn't been this revolutionary thing. And I can't really identify. I feel like most of the people that I have met recently or that are in my life currently kind of just assumed that I was queer upon meeting me. And I have a friend that I've known for about 20 years now. And I recently had a conversation with her about being queer. And I don't think I'd ever spoken it out loud. And talking to her, she was like, well, yeah, like that's just been you, like you're just you. And that's kind of where my gender comes in of like my gender is just I'm myself. And I'm able to express that however I want to. I have not to come out to my parents. I don't, going along with the educational aspect, I don't think that they know enough about queerness for me to have that conversation and then not have to have an educational aspect to it. I don't feel like explaining to them gender things. So that's just something that I'm going to live with, is them just not having access to that aspect of my life.
Is there some distance there that is preventing you from, I know you said it's about their understanding, but I know you also said that you grew up, they were Christian, maybe still identify as Christian. Like, what's behind the fact that you feel like you'd rather not share that part of yourself?
So my parents are still married. And my mom, I feel like she would kind of be understanding. She has said some offhand comments in the past that have made me think that if I started talking to her about gender, she would take it as like a personal attack. Like in high school, I had mentioned that I like shopping in the men's section for clothing. And she responded with, okay, well, like, as long as you don't think that you're a boy, which was just like an offhand comment to her. But I mean, that was like 15 years ago, and it's still something that sticks with me as a reason why maybe she isn't a safe person to come out to. And then my dad, I know that my dad voted for Trump. So I don't think that I want to have that conversation with him. I think he has this idealized version of me in his head that I just don't want to open up that can of worms.
So you're not only queer in terms of your identity, but I feel like you were talking about how queer you are in approach to life in general and your relationships and community building. Given how queerness is so central to who you are in the world, does that create some distance between you and your parents?
Yeah, it definitely does. I most recently was in a poly relationship, and it was with someone who I was in a monogamous relationship with them. We broke up, we got back together, and we're dating other people at the same time. And my mom saw that we had been posting pictures together and was kind of like poking at like, are you two back together? And I didn't really feel like explaining everything about that. And so I think for the past year, like I haven't really been open with my parents about anything that's going on in my life, because it would have to mean explaining the levels and dynamics in my relationships in my life. And that's a lot. And it's really unfortunate that there is this limit to the depth that I can have in my relationships with my parents. But it's not something that I want to deal with right now.
Do you have other family members that you would consider being out to? Or that you are out to?
No, I'm an only child. Well, I have two half brothers, but they've been out of my life for a while. And I've never really been close with like my extended family. So I think that's also a common trend in queer community is the importance of chosen family over like blood relatives. And knowing that maybe our parents, whether it's a generational thing or a religious thing, maybe don't understand or agree with our lifestyles and how we form relationships. And so it's not necessarily a priority for me to make sure that my parents understand me, because I feel very held and supported and seen in my other relationships.
So where did you find the most affirmation and support as you were coming out? I know you didn't have you said there was not a lot of fanfare around coming out, but I guess maybe in your identity or identities.
Yeah. I started hanging out with a friend group last summer, and we were all queer in our own delightful ways. And so being in that community and just continuing to grow my support system has been an incredible way to delight in coming out and be able to learn about how other people experience their genders and just play around with that and play around with the relationships that we're able to form with each other.
Talking about the summer of 2023?
Yes. Wait, what year is it?
We're in 2023.
2020, summer of 2022.
Okay. Okay, so you sort of have talked about this a little bit, but is there anything else you want to say about what do you love most about being queer? And where do you find queer joy?
I I love I love being able to follow my joy and like follow the happiness and not have to stick to any specific script or expectation, and being able to learn about myself in a way that feels very authentic, and know that um, things can change and things can flow and we can figure out what feels good for us. Um, it seems like it's such a trend with my friends' parents where they're all in very unhappy marriages. And I mean, I know that that can also exist in queer spaces too. Um, but the trends that we see with our parents, we're able to break generational cycles because we can identify what feels good and what doesn't, and figure out how to live a life that feels good for us.
So the next section is about disability, mental health, and neurodiversity. So you mentioned that you're neurodivergent. Can you elaborate some on how you're neurodivergent?
I am autistic, maybe ADHD, we're not sure. But I know that my brain does not work in the way that society expects, in the way that it's set up. Yeah.
So I know that you didn't get a diagnosis, and you didn't know that you were autistic growing up. Looking back, how do you think your sort of childhood was shaped by being autistic?
I think
big question.
Yeah. It definitely affected my social relationships. I skipped second grade, and it took a while for them to come to that conclusion. They were worried about my social skills, keeping up with that, and they wanted to keep me in a class that was of the people my age. And then I was always friends with my parents' friends, or I would better socialize with adults as a child than with people my own age. And that wasn't helped by the fact that I went to a private school, and so everyone kind of commuted in, so there weren't a lot of kids in my neighborhood. And then I was also an only child, and so I didn't really have the practice of engaging with people my age or engaging with siblings. And it was really just me and my parents. So social aspect, learning how to navigate emotions was really difficult. And that's still something that I'm learning. I feel like as a kid, I would like shut myself away to deal with big emotions, but never really learned how to sit with them and process them. I would just feel so upset and so isolated and not really understand why. So learning that I was autistic was very helpful for figuring that out and figuring out ways that could help me express my emotions.
Anything else?
It helps me know how I learn things. So for example, in my ceramics class, it was taught where we were taught how to work with wet clay, and then we got our bisque fires, and then it was a very step-by-step, but like on a weekly basis. But it was really difficult for me to start on a project without knowing the full scope of things and knowing what the end product would look like, which is top-down processing versus bottom-up processing, which is common with autistic folks, is having to know the full plan and the end product before being able to take the steps to get something started.
Where are you taking that ceramics class?
ARC. Oh, no. Yeah, ARC.
ARC.
Mhm.
Okay. So how do you think currently your experiences are shaped by being autistic? Like, do you ever feel like the need to mask? That sort of thing?
I'm trying very hard to be unmasked all the time. I work at a thrift store, and we recently changed locations, but at the other location, I felt very comfortable being unmasked because it's often seen. Let me figure out how to say that. Yeah. Okay. I work really hard to be unmasked because it takes a lot of energy to show up masked and have to go about your day thinking like, okay, what is the social standard for this interaction? And at work, I am able to make accommodations for myself. I work in the back, and so I'm not as public facing, but in public facing jobs, it's really difficult to have a customer service face. And that's something that everyone's kind of expected to do, and everyone knows that it's draining. But for autistic folks, it's so much more difficult because you're already trying to navigate these social situations that you don't necessarily understand, maybe, and having to put on a face that takes a lot of effort is draining. But in my relationships, I'm able to show up authentically and be unmasked, and it's very sweet. And like my friends and I just like stim all the time and dance around and accept each other in whatever form that we show up in.
So what does masking mean to you?
Masking is so like right now, eye contact. Masking is following these standards that society has set of what is respectable and acceptable in social situations. So I know that eye contact is a huge one, but like if I'm making eye contact with someone, I'm focusing on like, okay, am I blinking at the right pace? And am I like making too much eye contact? And so being able to look other places is really useful, but it can be seen as disrespectful. It could be seen as not paying attention. It could be seen as like rolling your eyes. But it helps formulate my thoughts. So that's one. Having to sit still is another one. Or just sitting in like classrooms can be very overstimulating with like the lighting and the hard chairs. And so being able to like move around is really nice. Taking classes online is nice because you can like be laying in bed if that feels a little bit better. So for me, masking is having to show up in a way that isn't what's most comfortable for my body and isn't going to be the most conducive to me being able to pay attention and actually experience instead of just sitting through it and overthinking it too much.
Do you ever feel like you have burnout?
Yeah. I think my first experience with autistic burnout was in 2020 with the lockdowns. I was working in retail at the time, and the store closed down for a couple months. And then when they opened back up, I didn't necessarily agree with the way that they were taking care of the mask mandates and taking care of cleaning. And I didn't feel like my safety was being taken into account. And that was a lot to deal with. There was a lot of unknowns during those first months of lockdown. And having to show up to work to survive during a global pandemic was a lot. And I feel like I've never really fully recovered from that. There's just been so much. I mean, we're still in a pandemic. My housemates and I just had a COVID scare this past week. And so it's still something that we're trying to navigate. But being in burnout is exhausting. And it's so hard because you still have to show up to work, because if I just stopped working, I wouldn't be able to pay my rent and I would not have a house to live in. And there's no good way there aren't a lot of resources and there's not a lot of understanding about autistic burnout from a capitalistic perspective. So I would love to take the time to recover from that. But I've just been working ever since 2020 and things just keep going on. But it's really difficult because burnout affects your communication skills. It affects how you're able to show up. And I just can't show up in the same way that I would like to.
So do you feel empowered in the knowledge that you have about what it means to be autistic and in being autistic? Do you find community?
Yes. Yeah. Basically all my friends are autistic. We just it's not a conscious decision. We just tend to find each other. And I know that there have been studies about like neurodivergent communication and how like neurotypical people are able to communicate and understand each other just fine. Neurodivergent people also have the same level of understanding in their communication. But once you cross the barrier and have neurodivergent folks interacting with neurotypicals, there is a significant decrease in how much they understand each other. And so it makes sense that all of my close relationships are people who also have the same approach to life that I do and have the same communication styles. So it's great. It's fantastic. We're able to accommodate each other and understand all of the little quirks about each other and have a lot more grace in our relationships with each other.
So how do you think being autistic shapes your experiences as a student?
It is so when I was doing my undergrad, I was not as informed on autism, and I had only come to realize that I was autistic at the end of my undergrad experience. But looking back, it makes so much sense that I wasn't able to stick to the routine that was set up for me by somebody else, and not able to make the accommodations that I needed to. So this time around, it's been interesting with all of the courses, most of the courses being online, and being able to go at my own pace. That's been very helpful. It's difficult because there's going to be days where I'm overstimulated and I'm not able to show up to in-person classes. And then, like I was talking about, the chairs being uncomfortable or the lights being too bright or whatever. It's hard to show up because I feel like with classes, like there's weekly expectations. And sometimes it's hard to meet those just because of whatever's going on in your life. And then also the way that material is presented sometimes doesn't make sense to me. And it's hard to figure that out. Also, another thing that I noticed was that in online classes, if there's recordings, sometimes I'm really sensitive to sound. And if there's like a buzzing or if it's too tinny of a sound or like the recording is low quality, I just can't listen to it, which makes it really inaccessible. And especially if there's no like captions, then that's a whole aspect of the class that I'm not able to access because of my sensory needs.
Do you feel like, or is there anything that you think, well, what's my question? Do you think that faculty understand the needs of autistic students?
I don't think so. I don't think so, and I think that's because society has like a very set expectation of what autism looks like because of media or however they get that information. And so I think if your needs aren't as high, then it could be seen as like laziness, or it could be seen as something else. And like, for example, I had a hard time showing up to my ceramics class this semester because of some of my neurotypical, or not neurotypical. Okay. No. I had a hard time showing up to some classes for my ceramics class because of the needs that I had this semester. And luckily I was able to express that to my professor, and she was very understanding, but I could also see how some professors might see it as just like not caring and not wanting to show up. And then I think there's also a limit to how many accommodations professors are reasonably able to make with their like timelines. Everyone's going to have different needs, and it's up to the professors to see like how much effort they want to put into making sure that each person has their needs met.
Well, I don't think we get training.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's kind of just like it's just up to the student to be able to advocate for themselves, but that can be very scary, especially if you've had negative experiences in the past. And maybe the student doesn't necessarily know what they need. They just know that what's being given to them isn't working. And so that's like additional work on both the professor and the student to maybe try to figure something out that does work for them.
And some autism advocacy involves trying to make autistic people assimilate and conform rather than actually attend to their actual needs, right?
Yeah.
So if that's, for instance, if that's how your parents approached you as you were growing up, then you might feel the pressure to just, like, you might not know how to advocate for your own needs. You might not feel empowered to advocate for your own needs.
Right.
So is there anything you think that faculty can do, anything specific you can think of that faculty can do to better accommodate autistic students?
I think being informed of the social model of disability and knowing that like accommodations help so much, and understanding that we all can work to figure out ways to make society a little bit more welcoming and comfortable for everyone. It doesn't hurt one group to help raise up the other in making accommodations. So that having many modalities in ways that they present information, being open to change, being open to accommodating to these things. I know that there was probably a lot of stress that came with COVID and moving things online. And so being open to adapting things and not necessarily being like, well, this is my class and this is how it is. So having open communication and being receptive and responsive to students and the feedback that they provide.
Do you think flexibility around deadlines is helpful?
Yes, absolutely. Things come up and sometimes we aren't able to manage that. So flexibility around deadlines is very important. And I think in order for that to be effective, it's important to have the students know that they are like a safe person to come to talk to about those things. So putting it out there before the student needs to come to them. So like it can be very intimidating to approach professors. And so if a professor initiates that conversation and says that they're willing to make accommodations and that they will be understanding about it, then it opens up the door for better communication.
Anything else you want to say about that?
No.
Okay. So what do you think the overlap is, or is there an overlap between the queer community and the autistic community?
Yeah, a huge overlap. I think that like part of being autistic is not putting things in generalized boxes. And so a lot of autistic folks will think about gender and be like, well, my gender is this like very specific thing or whatever. And like, why would I put myself in this box that doesn't fit all of my identity check boxes? I think that the way that autistic people think about things allows them to go beyond the gender norms and the expectations for sexuality that exists in society. So we're able to think about things in a more expansive way.
Why do you think that is?
You're asking me some deep questions.
I want you to write a book. I'm asking you to write a book on camera right now.
I know. Jeez. This is my dissertation. I think that since autistic folks are so used to already going against social norms with how we express ourselves, and like we don't feel, okay, I'm not going to speak for all autistic people, so I will speak for myself. I don't feel particularly pressured or pulled to fit into like behavioral norms. So with my unmasking, I'm able to like not make as much eye contact with people or not put on a fake personality to chit chat with folks. And so with already being used to challenging social norms, we can look at gender and be like, okay, well, this doesn't feel right for me. So like, what does? And exploring that a little bit more.
And what about sexuality? Do you think it's related to sexual orientation?
Probably.
Maybe for you personally, have you thought about it? I don't know. It's hard to kind of speak about the general relationship. And I'm asking that because it's something I'm learning about and I'm curious to know about too. And I'm sure, other people are curious to learn about. There's some, and I don't know all the details, but there's some overlap between identifying as asexual or aromantic and identifying as autistic. So, yeah, I'm just sort of, I'm trying to learn more about that myself. So you have to have all of the answers.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I could speak. So I was talking to a friend within the past year and saying how, like, at the time I was single and I was saying that I don't understand why I would ever want to be in a relationship because I feel like I'm fulfilled in my friendships already and I'm able to show up however I want to in those relationships and it feels good. And I don't understand what necessarily is the difference between a partner and a friend. And my friend was like, hey, bud, I think you might be aromantic. I was like, oh, okay. So I was thinking about that more. And yeah, I think that being autistic is just I don't know. I don't know why there's so much overlap. And I think it's just that like we aren't going to just go along with these expectations because they're expected of us. And just like looking into that more and coming up with all these terms to find something that we identify with more.
Under what circumstances are you out as autistic?
Just to friends. I don't really bring it up in like school or work settings because I feel like there's such a stigma towards what that means. And I'm also worried that any misstep that I like as a person would be attributed to being autistic. And so luckily in my workplace, I'm able to make accommodations that work for me, and that allow me to do my job as needed. But it's not something that I necessarily feel safe to bring up in work or school settings.
So like it strikes me that what you're saying is sort of like very similar to the queer experience, right? Mm-hmm. Like hesitating to come out because other people don't understand and because they attach a stigma to what it means to be autistic or to be non-binary or queer.
Yeah, like I was saying, it's I'm just trying to live and just trying to enjoy my life. And for me, a lot of my fulfillment in life comes from things that I do outside of work and school. And so that's where I'm able to show up most authentically. But I don't think that it's worth it for me to put in the energy to educate, whether it's about queerness or about neurodivergence, in other settings where it's maybe not going to be well received or understood very well.
Okay, so the next section is about race and ethnicity in class. So you mentioned that you're multiracial, Choctaw, Filipino, and white. Can you elaborate? You know what I mean?
Do you want that blood sample?
No. Not a blood sample. Like just talk about your family a little bit and your identity as multiracial. And I know you talked a little bit about it already, but sort of how does being multiracial and how does being Choctaw, Filipino, and white specifically, how do you think that shapes your life, your experiences?
Yeah, I think the experience of being multiracial in itself holds a lot of confusion and a lot of isolation. And I know that I've spoken to a lot of my friends that are also multiracial, and even though we don't share the same like background or breakup of ethnicities, they do share the idea that they don't feel like they're able to fully identify in any specific direction because they're not whatever enough to do so. And so there is a divide in how deeply we're able to connect with that. And that is something that I would like to connect with more. It's just not the primary focus of my identity right now.
Have you ever identified with the term Two-Spirit?
I did. So when I took queer studies, I did want to research into that a little bit more. And so I was trying to research for Choctaw specifically. But there was no specific information on that in Choctaw culture. But one thing that I do know about Choctaw culture is it's very welcoming and inviting. And as long as you're coming in with respect, then like a lot of people are welcomed. And so I feel like Choctaw is very open to creating an identity that feels good for you. So I think that is something that I would feel more comfortable looking into, possibly identifying as that if I were able to connect more with my Choctaw background.
So who in your family is Choctaw?
My dad.
Your dad. Oh. I was going to say.
Yeah.
I was going to say, considering what you just said, maybe there's I don't know, I was going to ask you about that family relationship, but it sounds like something else is overwhelming for your dad. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so my dad is half Choctaw, half Filipino. And his mom immigrated from the Philippines. And
do you hear a noise?
I do hear a noise. But okay. My dad is half Choctaw, half Filipino. His dad immigrated from the Philippines, and he grew up in Oakland and was not connected to his ethnicity or cultures at all. So that's kind of where that ended. And he has his own other things that are a little bit more important for his identity than that background. So that's not something that I'd be able to connect with him on.
So if you feel like you want to connect with your cultural background, you sort of feel like you have to do that on your own, or do you have support, family support at all?
My extended family is pretty involved, but they are in the Bay Area, and so it's a little bit more of an effort to get down there. And I know that the Choctaw Nation has a lot of resources online that I would be able to get into. So I would love to learn the language. I know that it's dying, so it'd be great to be able to speak that and preserve that aspect of the culture. But I am in burnout still from 2020, and so I haven't had the energy to look more into that.
So there's I think I read some statistic about the percentage of people who identify as both multiracial and non-binary specifically is actually higher than people who identify as just with one race or ethnicity. I didn't say that very clear. There are more people who are multiracial who are also non-binary than people who identify with one race and ethnicity being non-binary.
That's so cool. I've never heard that statistic before. That's so cool.
Yeah,
and it makes sense because I feel like probably the identity that came first, or like was the identity that was connected with first was probably the multiracial aspect. And so being in this situation where you're like, okay, well, I don't feel particularly called to this identity, but I also don't feel called to this identity. It would make sense that would translate into gender as well. Mm-hmm. That's so cool and also so validating.
I'm glad.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I want to understand it better. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Just sort of, thinking about it, but I want to read more about, I don't know what's been written. A lot of, and I think in academia, there's a lot of, I don't think there's as much as needs to be done around kind of like studying, researching, writing about, teaching about the multiracial experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I feel like there's maybe there's more recently, but yeah, there's a real need there. And then, it's interesting, the intersection between queerness and being multiracial too.
Yeah. That's really, really cool.
So how do you, have you experienced bias, discrimination based on your racial identity and ethnic identity?
I don't think so.
That's a
Yeah,
hard question, I know, because it's about, usually people think about specific ways that people have treated them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think just kind of some bias in not feeling welcomed in spaces for certain ethnicities or certain cultures. I've been told, like, I was trying to connect with someone a few years ago, and they were looking for, they were a photographer looking for POC to do a photo shoot for. And I like reached out to them, and they said that because I was white passing, I didn't qualify, or they didn't want to work with me. But then also in all white spaces, I definitely feel alienated in there. And so this weird, like, in between, not feeling welcomed in spaces.
And it's, I mean, I guess that person is the one kind of like controlling that project, but who are they to say who's white passing? And I don't know.
Right. Yeah. But it's interesting. Because if you like put me in a room with white people, then like there's a difference. And yeah, I have experiences.
Either, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So
that's unfortunate.
It's a weird liminal space to be in. And so I do hold my other multiracial friends near and dear because they understand that it's difficult to connect with a culture.
And do you feel like you seek out friends or community that people who are multiracial who share your experience?
When they come into my life, it's something that we can connect on. But I think probably queerness is like my top way to connect with people right now.
Can you think of other ways that being queer and multiracial might intersect and shape your experiences of the world? You can think about education specifically. Being queer and multiracial in the classroom. Maybe, I don't know, I'm always doing just two of your identities. But
yeah.
It's the more identities you throw in, it's harder.
Right.
Yeah, but
it's intersectionality,
yeah.
baby. I can't think of anything specifically other than just like being seen in like an ambiguous framework where people aren't sure what you are, which is a weird question to ask people, but yeah, but otherwise I don't think, this could be me just like not picking up on cues, but I don't think that my ethnicity has had a whole lot of pull in how I am perceived in like classroom settings.
What about how you perceive the classroom setting?
It definitely affects who I feel comfortable like relating to. Like there are some other Native students that are in some of my classes, and I want to relate to them and be able to talk to them and like get information out of them and learn from them. But I'm worried that in approaching them, they would just see me as like a white girl, which I am neither. But not have to have that. Like I don't want to have that conversation with them.
Kind of sad, right? Because I mean, that's what colonialism is. It's like forced assimilation, like distancing people from their cultural roots, their cultural background. And so there are a lot of people who of various races, ethnicities, right, who feel distanced in some way, or need more knowledge for various reasons because of, I mean, it's white supremacy and colonialism, right?
Yeah.
But specifically, I'm thinking about Native American history.
Right.
It's a very strong through line in Native American history.
Right. And with it being such a, like, so much of it was passed down through oral history, that like that is how, that would be the best way to learn, is to learn from our elders. But sometimes initiating those conversations can be really difficult and inaccessible.
Do you think there's some gatekeeping that happens?
Probably. Possibly. From what I know about the Choctaw Nation, I don't think they're very gatekeepy. I know that my uncle, who was a white man who married into the family, he loved Choctaw culture, and he would show up to, like, when the chief would come tour around the state, and he would go to powwows, and he was very respectful and inspired by Choctaw culture. And one of the times that he met the chief, he became an honorary member of the tribe and had a little certificate signed off by the chief. So that goes back to what I was saying about Choctaw culture being very welcoming and inclusive, as long as you're respectful of it. But it is also hard to gauge where the interest is coming from.
So, do you know anything about your Choctaw lineage, like where it go, like how far it goes back, and like where in the U.S. people lived, like family members lived? Have you gotten some of that information from your dad?
From my mom. My mom does genealogy. Okay. Yeah. Okay. My dad, I know he knows his like closer family members. I know that we originated in Georgia, and then through the Trail of Tears had to move to Oklahoma. So my dad still has some land in Oklahoma from the government. There's a little peanut farm on it. But that's all I know about that. It's so sad how much of the history is lost because of the way that my ancestors were treated, and just how America was formed. There was so much culture and history that we don't know about anymore. And that was something that when I was researching Chief Spirit, specifically in the Choctaw tribe, it was a lot of things for tribes are kind of like, well, we don't know about this tribe specifically, but we know that tribes in this area kind of did this. But it's kind of devastating to not be able to tie it directly back to a specific tribe. And I know that even like Choctaw is one of the recognized tribes in America. And so I feel like there are more protections on Choctaw than there are on other tribes. So I can't even imagine what a tribe that isn't federally recognized, like how much of their culture has been preserved.
So can you talk some about your class background? Has it changed over the course of your life?
My parents were working class for most of my life. And I think that mostly became apparent when I decided, I think a week out from college applications being due, that I decided I wanted to go to a 4-year. And they hadn't saved anything for that to happen. And so I went through the whole process of applying for FAFSA and dealing with that. But somehow they made it work. And recently my parents have become a little bit more comfortable in their finances. Only one of my parents works right now, and they're able to take care of everything financially that they need to. And even with unexpected costs, they're still comfortable. And so I know that in the future, I will be taken care of once any inheritance happens. And so that's been something that's really interesting to navigate, because I am working class right now. And I do have to balance making sure that I still qualify for my benefits while also being able to support myself and going to school. So I just need to make sure that I'm able to sustain myself for now, But I know that I do have privilege in knowing that if I need to, I can fall back on my parents, but I would really rather not.
What did or do your parents do for work?
My mother was self-employed for most of my life as a seamstress, and my father works for a roofing company that he's been with for like 30 years at this point. Yeah.
Is he a manager at the roofing company?
He is an assistant manager. I don't really know how I don't understand how money works. And so their comfort level is very surprising to me. But I know it has to do with like union stuff. Yeah.
So he has a union job.
He has a union job.
That's good, because I know a lot of construction jobs are not union anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little bit about what you do for a living and how you get by?
Yeah, I work for a thrift store. It's connected with Weave. That is a nonprofit that helps survivors of domestic violence. And so all of the proceeds from the thrift store that I work at go back to the nonprofit to help with their programs. It's a job. I would love to get out of retail. I've been working retail since 2017. It just feels the most accessible because a lot of office jobs do want you to work full time. And with my needs as someone who is autistic and also being a student, working full time isn't really accessible for me right now. So I would love to figure out how to balance that, and eventually get into something that gives back a little bit more to the community. I do have my bachelor's in psychology, and I was working at a short-term crisis residential facility for a while. Got burnt out there and left. And so I want to figure out a way to balance my desire to help the community with also taking care of myself.
Why do you want to, or how do you like retail in general, I guess?
Oh, I hate it. It's just there. So much of my life ties back to autism. So there are rules. There are rules on how, there like return policies. There are set rules. And I feel like retail, a lot of the times the rules are bent because it's like, oh, the customer's always right. So that's just frustrating, and it's very draining to show up to a retail job. But it is the easiest to get into, and I know that I can get by with the hours that I have there.
Do you have to interact with customers very much?
I do now. I recently changed locations of the thrift store that I work at. The one that I used to work at closed down, and that was great. I was working in the back and sorting a lot. But I do have to work with customers now, and it can be frustrating. Yeah.
Why are they not nice? Or is there a mix?
I think for me, a lot of the reasons why customer service is not the most fun to work in has a lot to do with overstimulation. Like we got our heater fixed in the store last week, and now it's just like uncomfortably hot in the store. And so there will be days where I'll be out on the floor and I can feel like every item of clothing on my body. And then I'm like aware of like every single hair follicle, and I'm aware of like the baby crying in the corner and loud noises and the fluorescent lighting. So it's very overstimulating. And in that situation, it's hard to show up in a way that is helpful. When all I want to do is just like go in the back and like stim the feelings away.
I worked a few retail jobs, but it's been a long time since I've worked retail. Don't remember liking it particularly.
Yeah.
But I don't think I liked interacting with customers. That was
Yeah.
the main thing.
Yeah. It's the
Felt
customer
very fake all the
interactions.
time.
Right. And it's the like, oh, how are you today? And then they either say good, and it's like, okay, what is the point of this interaction if we're just gonna be following this
But
weird
at Trader
script?
Joe's, they want to know everything you're doing in your
Well,
life.
that's the other option is that they just that, or they'll like the customer will just be like, oh, I had a customer one time that was buying like some fake roses, and I just like made a cute little like, oh, those are sweet. And then she proceeded to tell me how her husband died, and this is like her first Valentine's Day without her husband in like 17 years. And I was like, ma'am, it's 8:30 in the morning and I get paid $16 an hour. Like, I'm not your therapist. I'm so sorry that happened to you, but that's a lot to drop on a stranger. So that's it. It's the social interaction aspect of it where people expect customer service workers to be these like peppy, upbeat figures that are always going to just help them out. But in my unmasking journey, that's not who I am. So that's been an interesting thing to work around. But as I said, luckily my job, I'm able to like make some accommodations, and I will tend to work in the back a little bit more where I just need to interact with a handful of people at a time. And that's a lot better.
So what is it like being queer at work?
It's interesting. Up until, so when I first started at this job, I had a friend who was already working there, and ahead of me starting at that job, she went around letting everyone know that my pronouns were they, them, which are the pronouns that I use with her. I didn't necessarily want to get into that with this job, but that was something that they found out. And then it was this weird, like, unspoken, like, no one talked to me about that at any point. And I would, like, be interacting with someone, and they would use she, her pronouns with me, and then correct themselves, and then just, like, fumble and make it uncomfortable. I had a coworker that I hadn't really talked to come up and, like, apologize for misgendering me this whole time, and I responded by saying, like, it's fine. Like, that's not how I introduced myself to you. So, like, it's okay. But then she proceeded to, like, make it a big deal. I was like, no. Like, if you want to use they, them pronouns, you can't. Like, I will. That's fine. And so that's kind of the interaction that I look to avoid in using all pronouns. So that's been very interesting. I feel like I am the only person at work who uses they, them pronouns. And it's just, they will come to me with questions about it, but not about me in particular. I've become the person to come to about queer questions and questions about gender and things. And I don't want to be that person. I just want to be myself. And they should be able to educate themselves outside.
Is there anything else you want to say about your economic class, your class-based experiences that you could think of? Being queer at work?
I think class status definitely affects your ability to show up for things, your ability to pursue things out of interest and joy instead of just like what's gonna help you survive. I've noticed that in being working class. I need to focus on making sure that my bills are paid more so than pursuing creative endeavors or being able to pick a career that feels good and fulfilling emotionally, instead of making sure that it's going to pay me enough that I can survive. So that's not a fun dynamic to work with.
Does work or do financial stressors ever interfere with your ability to get schoolwork done?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's having to. I know a lot of people work 2 jobs in order to support themselves, and still take care of household tasks and still get schoolwork done, and being able to go to work and show up, and then being exhausted from that can be difficult to go home and then write a paper about whatever's going on.
So, is there some kind of class-based difference that you notice between UC Davis and the community college level? Like in terms of what, just sort of being in the classroom and the learning experience and relating to your peers? And
Yeah, I think at UC Davis, a lot of my friends would either work on campus or were able to take the years off of work in order to pursue their degree. And so they were able to put more energy into showing up for class. I've noticed that in my classes, a lot of people will have full-time jobs, or will be dealing with all these other things on top of it. And so there's added stressor of having to fit school into survival.
yeah, I've talked to some students who are like, yeah, I'm in school full time, I work full time, I get 3 hours of sleep every night, you know.
Yeah.
And that's a more extreme example, but there's some variation of that, just sort of trying to balance a lot of different things.
Right. And that's not to dismiss. I know that there are students in four-year universities that also have to work full-time to support themselves. But it seems like there's more financial aid maybe available, or there's more access to resources so that they're able to focus on school in that aspect. But community college, it seems like there's a lot more people who are struggling with that.
Okay, so anything else about class that you want to say right now? I might think of something later, but
Yeah, not right now.
okay. So with regard to education, where did you go to high school?
I went to high school in Oakley. It's called Freedom High School.
Is that a public school or?
Yeah, public.
So did you know that you were queer when you were in high school?
Yeah. My high school was kind of it was nicknamed like the gay high school of the area. And so a lot of the student body was queer. And so I didn't necessarily know that it was something that was outside of the norm. And so it didn't feel like very isolating. We had a very supportive GSA club. And it was just kind of how high school was, which is, I know, unusual compared to like other people. Yeah.
Did you have any classes that discussed queerness and any kind of, no, in a way that didn't feel superficial or
No.
very introductory?
No. I don't think queerness was really talked about at all in any of my classes. Which is interesting that I still say that it was like a pretty gay school. And I think that that's been consistent throughout my life of it feels more comfortable to be in community and find support with other queer folks instead of like established classes, or like it would feel strange to have that taught by a professor or a teacher in high school who maybe wasn't queer. And yeah, I feel like it would be pretty superficial if it were.
So what about in college? Were you able to take any classes that were that focused entirely on queer or trans topics?
I didn't during my undergrad, but I did take queer studies. That was my first semester at ARC. And I feel like that was still limited because it was an introductory course. It was still limited in how deep we could get into the topics. And then also because it was a requirement for some majors. I know that there were some people in the class who maybe didn't necessarily want to be there. So that affected how comfortable I felt sharing my experiences. And it limited how deep we could get when we were still having pretty introductory conversations halfway in the semester.
So can you talk some about why you decided to take a queer studies class in the first place?
Yeah, I wanted to delve into like the history of queerness. A lot of my knowledge about queerness just comes from lived experiences and hearing from my friends. So I wanted to know more about, on a wider scale, like a global scale, where we all come from and what has led us to where we're at right now, and learning more about the people from the past and the sacrifices they've made and the fights that they've had to fight in order to get the recognition and rights that exist today, and to also learn from history to see how we can propel into the future for fighting for more rights.
So why do you think it's important generally for the curriculum to be inclusive of a queer and trans experience?
The curriculum in general? Or?
Yeah, just at the college level in general, because I asked that question because I would say most of the curriculum is not very inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And doesn't seem to me like there's a ton of thought given to the idea of making the curriculum more inclusive. So why do you think it might be important for students broadly to have a more inclusive curriculum?
It's the idea of representation, and being able to see yourself in the people that you're learning about, and seeing that queer people have always existed, and being able to trace the stories and the history. It's very important, and I feel like we're very through most of the curriculum that we are given, a lot of it is about white cis men, and so it's nice to be able to hear these stories and hear things about people who look more like us.
So if you could, would you take other courses that focus on queer and trans topics, and what would you like to learn about?
Everything. Yeah, I would love to. I would love to learn more about the overlap of neurodivergence and queerness. I think that'd be really fun to dip into. And just the history of a lot of terms in the queer community, more than just the introductory terms that we learn about. I would learn to love about learn. I would love to learn. I'd love to learn about like queerness in media, and representation throughout the years, and just learning about any queer people. More, yeah. There's definitely a gap in the curriculum where it isn't really brought up very often. But I think if a professor decides to add more queer curriculum in, it also shows the students that they are a welcoming environment, and that they like understand and take these things into consideration. And so it can help the students feel safer in those classes.
Have you been in classes that are like at least touch on queerness here and there? Other classes?
I think the extent of that is just like pronouns, asking pronouns. And then even then it's a matter of if they're actually going to use them or not. I know one of my classes this semester had an online orientation, or one of my classes this semester had an in-person orientation, and we had to make name cards with our pronouns. And so it's always nice to have that brought up, especially if it's not brought up specifically because there is a student who is gender nonconforming or visibly queer. It's nice to just have it as a blanket set standard to come into. But then whether or not you enforce people using correct pronouns is another thing. And then also during that orientation, there was still use of some odd gendered language from the professor, to where it seemed like maybe they still have some to learn about gender. But they were talking about something to the effect of like all women wearing bras. And so it's like, okay, you can ask for pronouns all you want, but what are you going to do about like gendered language in your classroom?
Have you found that you've been in a situation where you have to teach other students about what it means to be queer or non-binary in the classroom?
Mostly with when pronouns do come up, then I know a lot of it, like it confuses a lot of people, because I think a lot of people also have an expectation of what a non-binary person is supposed to look like, which kind of defeats the purpose of being non-binary. But I know that like there's a very androgynous look that is associated with the non-binary identity. And so like being femme presenting, it's been very interesting existing in spaces where people will just assume my pronouns. And then when I tell them that my pronouns are they, them, they'll maybe be accepting at first, but then it'll just completely revert back to she, her. And so that's the issue of pronouns, where it's like, are you memorizing my pronouns, or are you taking my pronouns and actually deconstructing what gender means to you? It does mean a lot when I am asked my pronouns, because I know that I am not as visibly queer as other folks. So it's important to have a policy in place to be able to bring these things up before it becomes obvious that you're just bringing it up because you don't know how to address one student in the class.
So, if you had your preferences met, that was a weird way to put that question, but ideally, would you like the atmosphere in the classroom to be? So you said, like with regard to like gender pronouns and questioning gender, challenging this binary system that we live under. What do you think can be done in the context of the classroom to do that? I don't know. Did I ask a question that's
Yeah.
understandable?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's so difficult because even if professors set up a very welcoming environment, I think to answer the question, basically, I think just like having name and pronoun be like the standard introduction, that is the basics of what can be done. But then you get into maybe some of the students in the class don't necessarily understand that, and then it turns into a whole teaching opportunity for them, which takes time away from the class. So yeah, it's difficult to figure out like what would be the most ideal situation in that. And I know I've had this conversation with a couple of people where they don't feel comfortable asking for pronouns in conversation because they don't want to feel like they're outing somebody. But my response to that is that, queerness is a very individual thing. And so if somebody doesn't want to use certain pronouns in certain circumstances, they should be the ones to be able to make that decision. So asking is always better than assuming.
So provide the opportunity to share for everybody, not just the queer people, right?
Right.
Their pronouns, and they can decide what they want to do.
Right. Yeah, like putting the autonomy back to the students.
So what do you think faculty can do specifically to learn how to use the correct pronouns?
They should be responsible for their own education on the topic, and not put it on the students. Just being aware of the assumptions that you tend to make, being aware of your biases about what a certain gender should look like, and then doing research into queerness, educating yourself on queer terminology, being open to feedback, and maybe also providing the opportunity for feedback. So like conversations like this, but to just put it out to their students of like, do you feel safe in this classroom? And like, what can I do to help you feel safer?
That's a great idea.
Yeah, that's I think a lot of people are so scared to touch on these topics because they don't want to offend anybody. But by talking about these topics, they become normalized, and you're able to get answers from people who it affects. And so everyone's going to be different, and everyone's going to have different needs and different preferences. And so just talking about it, and being respectful about it helps the people to feel heard and respected.
So what does it feel like to be misgendered?
It feels gross. It feels like, so I do feel comfortable with all pronouns. And I understand that I will be seen as a woman in society, without giving any context. But it still feels like just like gross. It makes me upset that people don't take the opportunity to educate themselves and think about these things and make assumptions about me, just based on what I look like. And I think the one, like what feels the worst to me is when I'm greeted in a group of people and people will be like, "Hey ladies," and it feels disrespectful. And I think especially in a patriarchy, there are like dynamics at play of being perceived as a woman. And so it feels very impersonal. And like they don't want to get to know me.
So we left off talking about gender pronouns in the classroom. Is there anything else you can think to say about that, about making the classroom environment more friendly or inclusive, maybe in general, for trans, non-binary, queer students in particular?
I think just, like I said, having a blanket policy on how you address gender non-conforming students, and not having it come up only because there are students who are visibly queer, and then also knowing that mistakes are okay. And I feel like if someone makes a mistake but then comes to me and like is willing to learn from it and change things, then that's so much better than being too scared to talk about things and just like leaving it unsaid.
Or getting defensive.
Yeah.
Or overly apologetic, right?
Yeah.
That's a big thing.
Right. And just making it like making it more normalized and not making it a huge deal.
Let's see. So have you had I guess, what have your experiences been like with inclusion in the classroom around your racial and ethnic identity? Around being multiracial, but also around sort of like Filipino experiences, history, Choctaw or Native experiences in history in general. Has that been inclusive, the curriculum?
Oh, yeah. Well, like queer studies, yes. I don't think. Queer studies was definitely inclusive of that. Queer studies was inclusive of like exploring queerness in multiple cultures throughout history and around the world. And my ceramics class was inclusive because I brought to her that I wanted to explore a connection of my culture through ceramics. And so she was brainstorming with me ideas on how to do that and how to feel connected to my ancestors. So that was great. But otherwise, I don't think any of my classes, I'm not taking very many like history or cultural or other classes like that would necessarily be inclusive of ethnicities or other cultures. So not necessarily inclusive, but not exclusionary.
And I think there's a general tendency to not be inclusive even in the more relevant classes of Asian American experiences.
Mm.
And then I think when Native American experiences are brought up in just sort of like general history classes, it's usually in a very general way, right? And not specific to particular cultures and tribes.
Right.
Do you think it would feel personally meaningful to you or important in some way for the curriculum to be more inclusive in a kind of more in-depth and nuanced way?
I think having the opportunity to do that, or at least being able to reach out to professors, and if someone is more interested in diving a little bit deeper into their specific culture, being able to reach out to professors to find resources to be able to do that. Because I feel like having an individualized experience for each student might be a little bit too much for one course. But it would be nice to know that the option is there to learn more about your own culture.
So provide some freedom in the class, space of the classroom, like with regard to an assignment or more than one assignment, to allow students to pursue their own interests.
Yeah.
So this is a more general question, but what do you think that can you think of any examples or of classes or practices that you've liked that you felt have been like a really good way to teach a class that, you know, on the part of any of your professors that you'd like to see repeated in other classes?
I think flexibility goes a long way. And being able to complete assignments in a way that is engaging for the student. So having flexibility with topics, or like what specific topic to focus on in assignments, or flexibility in what topic you're going to be researching, and just having like a broad guideline of what the professor wants to see, but then letting the student kind of explore the best way to do that for them. So that professors who are I enjoy professors who are very open about their humanness, and their ability to make mistakes, or not ability to make mistakes, but professors who are open about knowing that we all make mistakes, and knowing that we just need to communicate with each other, and we can figure out how to make things work. I feel like that's a great way to feel supported by professors, is feeling comfortable with coming to them with whatever's going on in your life, and knowing that you will receive.
Sorry. There's a lot of people coughing through when you're trying to talk. Okay, sorry. And I'll get more water in a minute, but I'm okay.
I definitely feel very supported when professors are transparent about what's going on in their own lives. And it makes me feel more comfortable being able to come to them if there's things going on in my life that are going to get in the way of me showing up in a way that feels showing up the best that I can in that class.
So have you ever struggled academically? Like, have you had to drop classes, or have you done not well in classes?
Yeah. During my undergrad, I had to drop some classes in the second to last week. I was going through a lot of things at the time. But I feel like during this time around, I have a more set routine, and I'm able to balance more things. But yeah.
So you're going through some personal stuff that made it difficult to do well. When something like that happens, is there anything you think that faculty could do to help you and sort of other students going through something similar do well in the class?
I think that's another situation where feeling comfortable talking to the professor is very useful, because I think it got to the point there were already things going on probably in like the 6th week out of a 10-week quarter. But I just didn't feel comfortable talking to my professors, and it got to the point where I was just so far behind that I ended up having to drop. And so knowing that the door is open to be able to talk to them probably would have helped in that situation.
Oh, I forget about the quarter system. That goes fast.
Yeah.
Before you know it, it's over.
Yeah.
So what's been your experience on campus? I guess both at ARC and SCC. Do you feel like how do you feel like the campus is or how does the campus feel, I guess, for you personally as somebody who's queer, and what do you think it's like for queer students in general, if you can think about that?
I've only taken a couple classes that have been in person, and I don't have I'm only a part-time student, so I don't have a full schedule that necessitates me being on campus for a long time. And so, like, the main thing that I can think of is I've noticed that for in-person classes, I do go into them knowing that I'm probably going to get misgendered and not wanting to, like, deal with that. And that's something that I don't necessarily have to deal with as much with online classes. And so that can be a lot of energy to get to campus, knowing that that's going to be your experience of going into the classroom and having to deal with that. I also, since I only have like one class at a time, I only know the bathrooms that are like closest to my class. So I'm not sure if there even are gender neutral restrooms on campus. But I know that the ones closest to the classes that I have taken have not been gender neutral. So that's always a weird thing to navigate, especially when they're on opposite sides of the building, because it's like, okay, you're either walking all the way to that side or that side. So having to make that decision.
Do you prefer to use gender neutral bathrooms?
Yeah.
And why is that?
Just not having to make the decision. I feel like, yeah. They also tend to be like single use, and so just having more privacy is nice.
There's been, as far as I can tell, a lot of hesitancy on the part of the district-wide administration to establish more gender-neutral bathrooms, particularly converting multi-stall bathrooms into gender-neutral bathrooms. I think there are a lot of reasons behind that. But this is a weird question, but if you were talking to somebody with some power to make a change in the system, right? Or multiple people with power to make a change, what would you say is the importance of establishing more all gender bathrooms, and even if those bathrooms are multi-stall bathrooms?
I think it's important so that people feel comfortable, and something as basic as using the bathroom shouldn't be something that you have to put so much energy into thinking about, and it shouldn't be a huge decision that you have to make. So having gender neutral bathrooms is important so that you can just go there, do your thing, and then return to whatever else you were doing, instead of being in this dilemma of deciding which one you want to use.
I feel like the administration must be buying into this sort of right-wing rhetoric about the danger posed by like gender-inclusive bathrooms. Because what else could be behind such a hesitance to establish more multi-stall bathrooms, right? That are multi-stall bathrooms that are gender neutral. What would you say to that kind of that argument about, like, I guess it usually plays out around like safety for women?
If there are people that are going to do bad things, they're gonna find a way to do it, and I don't think that having like a bathroom is a bathroom, and it's not like there's like a guard standing outside of every single bathroom to police who's going in and out anyway. And so if these things are going to happen in any bathroom, these things are able to already occur in gendered bathrooms. But having the safety of having students feel safe should be a higher priority. No, that still feeds into their argument. That phrasing feeds into their argument. Yeah, that's bad people will find ways to do bad things, whether or not there's a gender neutral bathroom to do it in.
So is there anything else you think that the district or the colleges you attend, anything that they can do to make colleges more trans and queer inclusive?
I think incorporating more queer and trans topics in the curriculum will make it more normalized and hopefully allow students who maybe aren't as educated to get this information in a way that doesn't feel as maybe overwhelming for them. So that in making it more normalized, it's not that they are having to have these huge conversations all at once, but it's just a part of the curriculum.
Yeah, maybe we wouldn't be dealing with this political backlash against queer rights if people were more educated to begin with.
Right. I feel like that's because in asking like what administration can do in order to make queer and trans students feel more comfortable, I feel like there are programs and like anti-hate policies in place already that would be the answer to that. But then it always comes back to like, well, what is the environment and like what are the other students doing to maybe make these people feel not as included or discriminated against. So education is the best way to fight that.
Is there anything else you could think of about like what a queer college would look like? What would queering the college look like?
Queering the college. I think more community care programs. I know that the like food pantry exists, but maybe extending those hours or making it like advertising that more so that it's more well known, and knowing what resources are available. And just flexibility in general with deadlines and expectations. Putting the power back in the hands of the students and being able to build an experience that is most beneficial to them instead of having to have these like very strict set rules.
Okay, there's always more questions I can ask, but maybe I'll ask two more. One is both very general. So in general, what gives you hope? What makes you excited when you think about the future? I can also ask you what makes you depressed, but try to maybe add on a positive note.
I get really excited thinking about new ways to connect with people. And I have to sneeze.
Coming slowly.
So slowly. Okay, maybe not. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Wow. All at once. Yeah. Anyway, I get really excited about finding new ways to connect with people, exploring new ways to take care of myself and take care of my community. I get really excited about forming these connections and figuring out ways to engage in mutual aid and to build a support network where all of my friends can just take care of each other. And if one of us has some excess, we share it. And just knowing that we can fall back on each other in hard times.
A more caring community and a more caring world is an admirable goal.
That's all I want. It shouldn't be that hard.
Okay, I guess the wrap-up question is just anything else you'd like to add or questions you'd like to return to?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking all of this time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.